Our next contest of the Better Photography Weekly Challenge is Whispers from the Wild. Our judge and mentor is Kirthana Devdas. She is a photographer currently living in Chennai. Kirtana was a recipient of the Sahapedia grant in 2018 for her documentation of Thira, a ritual practice in the Malabar region in South India, and a resident artist at the Juk Center for the Arts in Husavik, Iceland in 2016. Her work has been shown at the Angkor Photo Festival, Chennai Photo Biennale, and the Hyderabad Center for Photography. Her projects have also been commissioned by clients such as Facebook, Marico, HCL, Asian Paints, and High Design. Kirtana is also a member of a photo collective called 830 based in India. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks, Narofa. This theme, Whispers from the Wild, I thought as much as it is around nature and nature photography, I thought it would be nice to take it a little beyond that and look at the conversations that we probably have when we're in nature. So it's not just about like a good composition or, like not just a nature photograph, but also look at it from that conversation or that back and forth that happens when you're in nature. A lot of the time when you're alone in nature that this happens. So I thought it'd be nice. I'll be sharing some of my own work and talking a bit about the theme and also about what went into making some of the images that I'll be sharing. So the first set of images are from a trip that I had made to Iceland. I'd gone on a residency for a month. Yeah, so it was the peak of winter and there wasn't any public transport. So a lot of the exploring that happened was on foot. And it was about -15 on most days. It was really cold. And one of these days when I was walking on the beach, I saw these strange, almost hand-like looking patterns coming out of the sand. And I don't know if it was just that I'd spent that much time alone over there. It was a very isolated space because it was the peak of winter. There weren't many people around, and I was spending a lot of time on these long walks. But something about this image, when I saw it, it looked like this hand was outstretched and giving me a pebble. And I'm someone who collects rocks and flowers from the ground. So I picked it up and that's something I still have with me. But the reason I use this image is not so much to think about the visual reference of this image, but more about what, that sort of interaction that happens, that little moment that you have with nature. This is also from the same trip where we were driving from one town to another and a snowstorm had just started. And at this point, I'd already been there for a while and I was kind of used to this complete white that you see outside. But, for whatever reason, I picked up the camera and I felt like taking, sometimes you just have an inkling of a feeling where you just want to take some pictures. So I took out my camera and I made some pictures. But the point that I'm getting at is sometimes when you're in a space, you don't really see much of the grandeur of what you're looking at, or you don't really recognize an image while you're in that space. It's in the aftermath that you actually see the image for what it is. So when I was making these images, it didn't feel the same as it did when I came back, when I was back in India and I looked at my archive and then looked at these images, then suddenly they almost look like pencil drawing on paper. So what I'm trying to get at is don't always, what looks normal on one day could look extraordinary on another day. So don't judge an image before you take it. Just make the images anyway and then look at them later and see what you have. This is another image from that same day. So the one on the left, I was walking it was well after dinner. It was quite late at night, actually. And the whole town was asleep. I was still looking for something, to make an interesting image of. And at some point I stopped at a patch of snow and I set the tripod down and I was light painting something there. And for some reason, I kept getting this sort of green tint in my image. And I couldn't figure why, because the snow is white and when it reacts with light, then it gives you this kind of blue. But I kept getting a green tint and I stopped shooting. I stood up and suddenly I realized there was this aurora that had just started over my head. And, I turned around and made that image. And it was such a magical moment. And I couldn't have known that that image was coming, until I was actually there and in that space. So again, just go out and be present and be open. And these moments just sort of happen sometimes, when you least expect it. The image on the right, for some reason, walking out at night over there I felt safe doing that, which isn't very common when you're a woman, and someone living in India, there's a lot less of it. So I would take these long walks after dinner, and this was just after that snowstorm, the pictures that you saw earlier. So we had been locked in for 3 days because of the storm, and it felt nice to to finally be out and walking around. And I suddenly saw this tree, and for some reason, it felt like a self-portrait, the way it had its branches outstretched and the snow was gentle. And a lot of the time when you're making images, even though your canvas is nature, the image making is pushed by what you're feeling. And that is the kind of, that's again what I want to put focus on, that it would be nice when you're looking at your images that you're making or selecting for this challenge, that you look for that sort of interaction or moment that you've had. Even if it's not obvious in the image, I feel like it does kind of come through in its own way in the final image. So another thing that that I normally go to when making images is the time of day that you make an image. For me, it's either, before sunrise or at sunrise, or just before sunset, at sunset, and a little after, when it's dusk and everything sort of turns blue. These are my most favorite times to shoot. And I think that would hold good for most photographers. But the thing that I like most about it is there's this shift in color that happens. You suddenly have this warmth, this golden hour that happens. You have a pink light that comes through. And then after sundown, there's this blue that kind of, covers everything. So it's not just this, this color shift, but even the intensity of light kind of softens a bit. And when that happens, then there's a lot of scope for you to play with, even, either an external light, a flash, even your phone torch, for instance. But I feel like when the intensity of light is low, then there's so much more room for play. And that's when I feel like my image making is at its best, because there's a lot more room for you to play with your controls and play around with image making beyond just what you're seeing as is. So this image on the right, for instance, is an example of that, where, it kind of has a sort of painterly feeling to it. And that makes it slightly different from the way you would see it with your eyes. And I like it when my images do that. Not that it's something I look for, but sometimes it's interesting when that happens. The picture on the left is an image by Monet, and I didn't have this particular image with me, but another one of his water lilies is an image that I've had in the house for a very long time. So I feel like paintings, either consciously or subconsciously, also feed your image making, and that's another way to look for inspiration in your process of making pictures. Here again, not so much highlighting the frames as such, but again, to sort of look at how that consistency in color tone that happens at a particular time of day also lends to, enhancing your image. I like this kind of subdued orange warm tone that happens. These were shot in Corbett recently, and it's got this very soft, warm light that, that sets a different kind of mood in itself. So while the theme largely talks about nature photography, I think contact with nature can be in the smallest ways. And like there are so many different ways in which you can interpret this theme. I'm just showing you examples of ways in which I have done it in the past. So feel free to do, explore this any way that you please. But I just thought it would be nice to share this example on the right, where sometimes it's something just as simple as a beam of light. It's a self-portrait with the images on the right. But something as simple as a beam of light can also move you to make an image. And it was taken at a time when I had just moved to Bombay. I was still figuring my way around things. And, I feel like it records the feeling that I had then. And it was an exchange with just this beam of light and myself at that point. So don't think that you have to be somewhere far and wide to make a good image. You can very much do this just sitting at home. And photography is also a space that I think I go to, not just photography. I think nature has a very calming feeling about it. And I use it to express not just, beautiful sceneries, but also, something, if I'm not feeling too good, then photography does work as a sort of outlet for me to process those feelings. This is an image that I took in Chennai on the beach. It was the last weekend before the lockdown started. It was I'd gone to catch moonrise. And there's something menacing about the image now when I look at it. It could just be because of the events that followed, but it does hold that sentiment for me with this red moon rising and everything else. I haven't toned it to be black and white. It was shot like that because the light was really low. It looks like that. But another thing, like when you're photographing the moon, because I do photograph the moon a good amount, I've noticed that when you photograph when it's either at moonrise or at moonset, is when the intensity of light is least. So it allows you to catch the moon as well as the foreground and get enough detail in it. So yeah, in case you're someone who enjoys photographing the moon, I would suggest that you always stick around just when it's rising, because that's when it's a lot easier to shoot. So while I'm advocating shooting either early in the morning or in the evening at sundown when, all that color change is happening, that doesn't mean that you don't find reason to go out in the day and make good pictures. This one, for example, was shot in bright daylight, which is kind of why this streak that you see coming from the jet is that lit, because it's catching sunlight. But I pulled down the exposure just a bit and to give it that contrast and made this image. So just be out and make as many pictures as you can and judge them later. So this image was shot for an assignment for Soup magazine. We were working on a piece on urban wildlife. And in Chennai, they do a lot of work with the olive ridley turtles. So I was on assignment to photograph these turtles being released in the water for the first time. And I practiced, I got my lighting set, I checked it at home, made sure, everything was in order. I softened it because, I figure the baby turtles, you don't want to throw too much light at them. So I got my lighting ready and I was like, okay, I'm just going to go there and I know exactly what I'm going to make, as in what sort of visuals I'm looking at making. But I got there and then the sun went down, which is usually when they release the turtles. And they said, I can't use my lights because the olive ridley turtles, they navigate, they're light sensitive and it'll upset their navigation. So suddenly I couldn't use my lights anymore. It was quite dark. So I was forced to improvise and open up my shutter, pull up my ISO, and I worked with a very soft light, just my phone torch. But then what resulted was an image that I felt ended up being much stronger than the one that I had in mind, because you see the sparkle of water that's come from that dim phone light, and you feel the pull of the ocean coming in, to take this turtle in for the first time. And what I ended up with was a much nicer image than I anticipated. So leave as much room for that element of play and see where, being there in that environment, see where it takes you. Just go with the start plan, I'd say, and then just collaborate and improvise. And I like this image particularly. I have some other frames where the stag isn't looking at me, it's just looking ahead and walking. But this direct eye contact felt like a moment somehow for me, and it's one of my favorite pictures. Again, speaking about that moment of there's some kind of connection that you feel, a direct connection that you're feeling with you and nature. And for me, this picture is one example of that. So the next set of images that I'm going to be sharing are some that I made during the pandemic when the lockdown was on, like the first lockdown, and we were all kind of stuck in our houses. And the only respite that I got was just looking at the skies. So every day I would just spend time looking at the sky and making, just not thinking much about the images I was making, but just making them anyway. So just to say that, you can sit at home and still make pictures. Just to emphasize again that you don't have to be out somewhere spectacular to be making good images. You can just sit at home and find interesting things to photograph. This was a time where, everything was, the news was bad. Everyone was you weren't able to go out and see people. And for me, this image feels a lot like all I was feeling. It was just skyless, raining, gray. It's about, bringing the personal into your image making. And this is another one from, it's again from my balcony itself. I kind of like the contrast that happens with the left that's kind of dark, and then you see this little bit of light and a rainbow coming out. So I like that contrast. This is also a time where I think we were sitting in so much. I was dreaming a lot. And a lot of what's running through my mind is what's coming through in my image making. So this is essentially just a bush of bougainvilleas at home. But because of what you're feeling, you make images a certain way, and it feels like the flood of a dream to me when I look at the image. So a lot of the time for me, nature is the canvas on which I put things onto the way I'm feeling. So, yeah. This is also from the same time. I was doing a project with another photographer, Indra. It was like a photo conversation that we were doing. So I would post a picture and then he would respond with an image. And it was a worldwide thing. It was a really nice way of kind of getting people talking at a time when we couldn't go out and meet people. And it's an image I took from my terrace of these birds that were there was a whole flock of birds that were flying across. But the thing that I was feeling again kind of pushed me to make this frame, right? That touch was something that we were so deprived of at that time. And so that's another example of, just what you're feeling kind of coming across in your image making. And that you don't need, it was just birds on a terrace, but it still gets your feeling across. So yeah, I think that's just my closing slide. I hope I've made some sense through all of this and have given you some insight on how to approach the theme. So good luck, and I can't wait to see all your submissions.